It was supposed to be a normal day in the neighborhood, but it quickly turned into something much darker. Sarah, an 8-year-old deaf girl, was alone in her house when the seemingly sweet and helpful neighbor, Karen, knocked on the door. But instead of offering kindness, Karen had something sinister in mind. She brought a gift, a supposed hearing solution that would fix Sarah's hearing. But as Karen poured a mysterious liquid into Sarah's ears, the child winced in pain, feeling something wasn't right. Karen's smile was cold and calculating, as though she had been waiting for this moment. Little did Karen know Sarah's father, James, was just moments away from walking in. He had no idea what was happening, but the moment he stepped through that door, everything would change. What Karen did next was unforgivable, and it would take all of James's strength to protect his daughter. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the sound of children's laughter filled the air, no one could have predicted the dark secret lurking behind one of the seemingly perfect homes. It was a community where everyone knew everyone else, or so they thought. Among the residents was a little girl named Sarah. At just 8 years old, Sarah was deaf. Her world was one of silence, but she had an incredible family that filled her life with love and care. Her father, James, worked hard to provide for her and her mother, Maria. They were a tight-knit family, always looking out for one another. But there was one person in the neighborhood who didn't seem to understand Sarah's condition. Karen, a self-proclaimed helpful neighbor, was always too eager to offer advice about how Sarah's deafness could be fixed. She was an HOA Karen, the kind of person who believed she knew better than anyone else, especially when it came to how others should live their lives. She often made cutting remarks about Sarah's disability, judging her parents for not doing more to correct it. Despite her judgmental nature, Sarah's family tried to be patient, as they didn't want to cause drama in the neighborhood. But things were about to take a drastic turn. One afternoon, with Sarah home alone and her parents out running errands, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She knocked on the door, armed with what she claimed was a solution to help Sarah hear. But her intentions were far more malicious than anyone could have imagined. What happened next would shock everyone and change the course of this family's life forever. It all started when Karen crossed a line that no one could ever have expected. It was a typical afternoon in the small suburban neighborhood, where everything seemed to move at a slow, predictable pace. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the neatly manicured lawns and picket fences. Birds chirped from the trees, and the faint hum of distant lawnmowers could be heard from various houses. It was a peaceful place, one where neighbors exchanged pleasantries over the fence, kids played tag in the front yard, and everything seemed to be just as it should be. At the end of the cul-de-sac, the house of James and Maria stood proudly, a symbol of family and love. Inside, their 8-year-old daughter Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands clutching a crayon as she carefully colored in the lines of a drawing. The picture was simple, a rainbow with clouds and a big, smiling sun. Sarah's drawings were always bright and colorful, even if they didn't always make sense to those who didn't know her world. Sarah was deaf, born without the ability to hear the sounds that many people took for granted. But to her parents, her world was perfect just the way it was. They had built a life together, one of patience, love, and understanding. Maria, Sarah's mother, was always the one to encourage her daughter's creativity. She would spend hours teaching Sarah how to communicate through sign language and reading books that explained the world around her in ways she could understand. James, Sarah's father, was just as dedicated but in his own quiet way. As an accountant, he worked long hours, but when he came home, his priority was always his family. He would play games with Sarah, teach her new words in sign language, and make sure that she always felt included in everything. They made sure that Sarah never felt out of place in their home, and though their life wasn't perfect, it was theirs, and it worked. Sarah loved her family, and she loved the home they had created. The world outside of their house, however, was not always so kind. Sarah's deafness set her apart in ways she didn't fully understand. It wasn't that she was excluded or made to feel less than, but she often found herself on the outside looking in. While other children could run around the playground, laughing and talking to each other, Sarah had to rely on her own form of communication and the patience of those around her. She had friends, but sometimes it felt as though she was left behind, even when they didn't mean to. On this particular afternoon, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, lost in her drawing. Maria had gone to the grocery store to pick up some essentials, and James was still at work. It was one of those rare moments when the house was empty and Sarah was free to spend time with her thoughts, her crayons, and her imagination. She loved the quiet of the house, the sense of peace it gave her. It was the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, across the street, there was a different kind of atmosphere. The house of Karen, the self-proclaimed neighborhood watchdog, was always busy with the comings and goings of HOA meetings, community events, and constant chatter about what was and wasn't allowed in the neighborhood. Karen was the kind of woman who believed she had a say in everyone's business, no matter how personal or irrelevant it might be. If something was happening in the neighborhood, Karen had an opinion on it, and she wasn't shy about sharing it. Karen had always been vocal about her disapproval of Sarah's deafness. It wasn't that she disliked Sarah or her family, but rather that she didn't understand Sarah's condition. Karen was one of those people who saw disability as something to be fixed rather than something to be embraced. She often made comments about Sarah's deafness, suggesting that her parents weren't doing enough to help Sarah hear better. The fact that they had chosen not to get Sarah hearing aids or explore other treatments never sat well with Karen. She viewed it as a failure on their part, and she wasn't afraid to let them know it. At first, James and Maria had brushed off Karen's comments, chalking them up to her busybody nature. After all, every neighborhood seemed to have at least one Karen, and they didn't want to make waves. But over time, her constant remarks began to wear on them. James was especially frustrated, as he didn't like the idea of someone else dictating how he should raise his daughter. Maria, too, had begun to feel the pressure, as if they were somehow doing something wrong by accepting Sarah's condition and working with it rather than trying to fix it. But they stood their ground. Sarah was their daughter, and they loved her for who she was. On this particular afternoon, as Sarah sat drawing at the kitchen table, Karen had one of her usual ideas. She had been thinking about Sarah a lot lately and was convinced that there was something she could do to help. After all, if no one else was going to fix Sarah, then maybe it was up to her to do something about it. So, as the clock ticked closer to 3 p.m., when Maria would typically return from a store, Karen made her move. She grabbed a small package from her home, a gift she had prepared specifically for Sarah. It was a set of hearing aids, or at least that's what Karen claimed they were. In reality, they were just small, basic hearing aids, nothing special, but Karen had told herself they were the answer to everything. Karen had convinced herself that Sarah's parents were just being stubborn, refusing to acknowledge that their daughter's condition could be improved. She felt that Sarah's deafness wasn't just a part of who she was, it was something to be fixed, something to be cured. And she, Karen, was the one to bring that solution to the family. When Karen knocked on the door, Sarah, alone in the house, didn't hesitate to answer. After all, Karen had always seemed friendly, and her smile was warm and inviting. She had never given Sarah any reason to fear her. But today, everything was about to change. As Sarah opened the door, Karen stepped inside with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had something to offer, and she was determined to give it. "Hello, Sarah," Karen said, her voice as sweet as ever. "I've brought something that will help you hear better. I know it's been difficult, but these hearing aids will make a big difference." Sarah, trusting the woman who had always been kind to her, smiled and nodded. She had no reason to think anything was amiss. But as Karen moved closer, something in the air shifted. What started as a simple gesture of kindness would quickly turn into a moment of betrayal, one that would change Sarah's life forever. Sarah stood at the doorway, her heart beating with a mix of curiosity and excitement. The woman standing in front of her was one of the neighbors, Karen, who had always been friendly, at least in Sarah's eyes. Karen was a regular at neighborhood events, often quick with a smile and an offer to help. For Sarah, who was used to seeing the world from the sidelines, surrounded by silence. The kindness of others meant the world. And so, when Karen knocked on the door with a cheerful expression, Sarah didn't hesitate to invite her in. "Hello, Sarah." Karen greeted her warmly, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I brought you something special." Sarah, still clutching her crayon in one hand and the piece of paper she had been drawing on in the other, looked up at the woman with a smile. "What is it?" She signed, her hands moving with the graceful motions of someone who had practiced the language for years. Although Sarah couldn't hear the words, the language of her hands spoke volumes. It was her way of communicating with the world around her. Karen's eyes glinted with a strange excitement as she knelt down in front of Sarah. "It's something that will help you hear better," she said, showing the small box in her hand. "I know it's been hard for you, Sarah, but these will change everything. I'm sure your parents haven't thought of this, but I just wanted to help." The mention of her parents immediately caused Sarah to pause. Maria and James, her mother and father, had always been clear with her. There was nothing wrong with being deaf. She wasn't broken. She was just different, and different was okay. But Karen's words, they were different. There was something in them that didn't sit well with Sarah. It felt like an intrusion, something that didn't belong in her world. Yet, the kindness on Karen's face convinced Sarah that this was something important. Still, she hesitated. "Is it safe?" she signed, furrowing her brow slightly, trying to make sense of the situation. Karen's face softened, and she reached out to gently touch Sarah's shoulder, offering comfort in a way that seemed too practiced. "Oh, of course. It's perfectly safe, sweetie. I wouldn't bring you anything that could hurt you. Trust me, this will make things better. Your parents will be so happy you can hear better." The words felt hollow to Sarah, as if Karen was trying too hard to convince her of something that didn't need to be convinced. She had heard these kinds of assurances before, promises of solutions that were supposed to fix her, but Sarah knew better. Her parents had always told her that there was no need to change who she was. Still, Karen's smile was almost convincing. She couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this woman was only trying to help her. Without fully understanding the danger, Sarah opened the door wider, allowing Karen to step inside. She trusted the woman because she had never given her a reason to think otherwise. The house was quiet, save for the sound of Sarah's pencil scratching against paper as she had been busy drawing before the knock came. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the background was the only other noise breaking the silence. Karen stepped inside and made her way toward the kitchen table where Sarah had been sitting. Sarah followed her cautiously, her eyes still locked on the box that Karen was holding. It wasn't like the hearing aids she had seen in the movies. These looked different, smaller, more inconspicuous. They didn't look like they were supposed to fit into her ears. But Karen was insistent, and Sarah, unsure of what to do, decided to go along with it. "I'll just put a little bit in your ear," Karen explained as she opened the box. "This will help you hear better, just like everyone else." At that moment, Sarah felt a small twinge of unease. She didn't understand why, but something about Karen's words didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way Karen kept emphasizing how much better things would be for her, as though her silence was a problem that needed to be erased. Sarah's mother and father had never made her feel like something was broken about her. But Karen's insistence made Sarah feel small, as if the way she was living wasn't enough. "Please, don't hurt me," Sarah signed, her hands trembling slightly, her discomfort clear. Karen, seemingly oblivious to Sarah's unease, smiled warmly. "Oh, sweetie, I promise you, this will be so much better for you." With that, Karen gently tilted Sarah's head, positioning her to sit still as she took out the small bottle of liquid. The clear, viscous fluid glistened in the light. Sarah couldn't understand what it was, but she felt a strange pressure in her chest. Karen wasn't letting up. Sarah tried to pull away, but Karen was too fast. Before she knew it, a few drops of the liquid were inside Sarah's ear. The moment the fluid touched her skin, a burning sensation exploded inside her ear, sending shockwaves of pain through her body. Sarah gasped and pulled away sharply, her hand instinctively reaching up to her ear. Ouch! Stop! She tried to sign, but Karen was already too close. She grabbed Sarah's arm gently but firmly, holding her in place. It's okay, sweetie. Just a little bit more. And it will work wonders, Karen coaxed, her voice still calm, too calm for Sarah's liking. She could see the look in Karen's eyes, something darker than kindness, something cold and calculating. The pain in Sarah's ear intensified, and she winced in discomfort. Her head swam, and the world around her seemed to blur, as if she were losing control over her own body. The liquid wasn't supposed to feel like this. What was happening? But before she could pull away, the door creaked open. The familiar sound of the doorbell's chime seemed like a distant echo. And then James, Sarah's father, walked in. The door creaked open, and in that single moment, the world inside the house seemed to freeze. James, Sarah's father, stepped inside, his footsteps light as he entered through the front door, his work bag slung over his shoulder. He had expected a typical evening at home, a warm dinner, perhaps some time to unwind with Sarah after a long day at the office. But what he saw as he stepped into the living room was nothing short of a nightmare. He was greeted not by the usual sounds of Sarah's laughter or the sight of her coloring at the table. Instead, his eyes locked onto his daughter, who was sitting at the kitchen table, her body stiff and tense, one hand clutching her ear in a futile attempt to stop the pain. Karen, their seemingly harmless neighbor, was standing over her, holding something in her hand, a small vial of liquid. The moment he saw the scene unfold, James felt a sickening pit form in his stomach. For a moment, everything seemed to blur as his mind tried to process what was happening. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Karen, the woman who had always been so friendly, was standing too close to Sarah, her hands hovering dangerously around her head. The smile on Karen's face was anything but friendly. It was cold, calculating, and something James couldn't quite put his finger on until he saw the small bottle in her hand. Karen? James's voice cracked through the tension, his heart pounding in his chest. What are you doing? Karen straightened up at the sound of his voice, quickly wiping the smile from her face and replacing it with one of feigned concern. She turned to face James, her eyes wide with an almost practiced innocence. Oh, James, I didn't hear you come in. I was just helping Sarah. She seemed to be having trouble hearing, so I brought her something that would help. I know you've been so busy with work and all, and I thought I could offer a little assistance. James's blood ran cold. His mind raced as he processed the scene before him. Sarah's discomfort was evident. She was visibly shaking, her hand still gripping her ear in a way that made James's protective instincts urge. But it wasn't just the pain he saw in her face. It was something darker, something sinister. There was no mistaking it now. Karen wasn't helping. She was harming. Get away from her. James shouted, his voice a mixture of fear and rage. He rushed forward, his legs moving on their own as the urgency of the moment took over. He dropped his bag on the floor, barely noticing the heavy thud it made when it hit the ground. His eyes never left Karen as he reached his daughter's side, kneeling down next to her. Karen, too, took a step back, but she didn't leave. Instead, she stood frozen, her eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curling into a subtle but unsettling smirk. James, calm down. I was just trying to help. You don't have to be so dramatic. James's hands shook as he reached out to Sarah, pulling her into his arms gently but firmly. Her body was tense with pain, and her face was flushed with the agony she was feeling. She didn't make a sound, but the look on her face said everything. Dad, Sarah signed weakly, her fingers trembling as she reached up toward him. It hurts. It hurts so much. James's heart shattered at the sight of his daughter's distress. He immediately looked back at Karen, his gaze full of fury. What did you do to her? What's in that bottle? Karen took another step back, but her expression remained cool, calm. She was unbothered by the growing tension. It's just a special solution. I thought it might help Sarah with her hearing issues. I've read about it online. It's perfectly safe. It just needs a little time to work. She'll feel better soon. Perfectly safe? James's voice was rising now, his anger turning into something darker, something more desperate. You've been putting things into my daughter's ears without even asking us? You're not a doctor, Karen. You had no right to do this. Sarah whimpered softly in his arms, and that was the breaking point for James. His fatherly instincts kicked in, and his rage boiled over. He turned on Karen, his voice sharp and commanding. Get out, right now. You're not welcome here anymore. What you did was unforgivable. Karen didn't flinch at his anger. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her expression almost bemused, as if she were waiting for him to calm down. James, I was just trying to help. Your daughter deserves a chance to hear. Isn't that what you want for her? Not like this. James yelled, standing up quickly, still holding Sarah in his arms. You've hurt her. You've crossed a line, and you have no idea what the consequences could be. Karen seemed unfazed, almost detached. She raised an eyebrow. It's not that big of a deal, James. I thought you'd be grateful. But if you want to overreact, fine. I'm leaving. But don't blame me if Sarah never gets the chance to hear the world the way you want her to. James's blood was boiling, but he didn't have time for another word from Karen. He was already dialing his phone, his hands shaking as he looked down at Sarah, who was clinging to him with wide, terrified eyes. His voice was steady, but the worry was palpable. I'm calling the doctor. I don't know what you put in her ear, but I'm getting help. You're not walking out of here without consequences. Karen stepped back toward the door, her expression still unervingly calm. Fine, call whoever you want. But don't say, I didn't warn you. Some people just don't know how to appreciate help when it's offered. As she turned to leave, James couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. He had trusted Karen. They had all trusted her. And yet here she was, leaving his home without so much as an apology, not for the damage she'd caused, not for the harm she'd done to his daughter. With a final glance over her shoulder, Karen left the house, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her, but James's mind was still racing. He looked down at Sarah, who was trembling in his arms, her small frame so vulnerable. You're going to be okay, James whispered softly, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. But the doubt in his voice betrayed his fear. What had Karen done to her? And why? What could possibly make someone do something so cruel to an innocent child? Before he could process any more of the madness, his phone rang. It was the doctor. James didn't waste a second. This is an emergency, he said, his voice shaky but determined. My daughter's been hurt. She's in pain. Please, we need help now. The doctor's calm, reassuring voice came through on the other end, but James couldn't shake the terror that gripped him. He had no idea what Karen had done, but he would make sure she paid for it, one way or another. James sat at the edge of the couch, his eyes fixed on Sarah, who lay on the living room sofa wrapped in a blanket. Her small frame was curled up, and although she wasn't crying, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes that tore at his heart. He had always been the protector, the one who made sure his family was safe from the world's dangers. But today he had failed. His daughter was in pain, and he didn't even know why. He couldn't help but feel the weight of that failure crushing him. He had called the doctor immediately after Karen left, and the doctor's office had promised him they would see Sarah right away. But the waiting felt endless. Every minute stretched into what felt like an eternity. James sat with Sarah, holding her hand gently, trying to soothe her as best as he could. She hadn't said much since the incident, but her face was a mix of confusion and discomfort. She hadn't fully understood what Karen had done to her, but James could see the fear in her eyes. The way she had recoiled from Karen's touch had been enough to confirm that this wasn't just an innocent mistake. James's mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened. Karen had come over under the guise of being helpful, but her behavior had been anything but that. She had lied. She had manipulated him, convinced him that she was just trying to fix Sarah to make her better. But the more James thought about it, the more he realized something terrifying. Karen hadn't been trying to help at all. She had been trying to control Sarah, to impose her own ideas of what was right She had overstepped, and now Sarah was paying the price. The sound of the front door opening broke James's train of thought, and he stood up, his muscles tight with anticipation. Maria walked through the door, her shopping bags in hand. Her face instantly changed when she saw the scene before her. She dropped the bags with a soft thud on the floor, her eyes flicking from Sarah to James, concern written all over her face. "James, what's going on? What happened?" she asked, rushing toward them. James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The words didn't come easily. "Karen, she did something to Sarah. She came over to help, but she hurt her." His voice cracked on the last word, and his heart felt as if it were being torn apart. Maria's face turned pale as she looked at Sarah, who was still curled up on the couch, clutching her ear. "What did she do? What happened?" James ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling up again. "I don't know what's in the liquid she put in her ear, but it's hurting her. She's been in pain ever since. I called the doctor. We're waiting to hear back, but I'm scared, Maria. I don't know what to do." Maria knelt beside Sarah, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Sarah didn't flinch this time, but her eyes were filled with worry. Maria's heart broke for her little girl. She looked at James, her eyes filled with silent questions. "Karen did this? She just came in, and what? Did she force this on Sarah?" James nodded grimly. "She brought some kind of solution, claiming it would help with Sarah's hearing. But it's clear now that it was more than that. Karen was trying to fix Sarah, to make her normal. And she did it without asking us, without any consideration for what Sarah actually needed or wanted." Maria's eyes widened in horror. "She never even asked? She just went ahead and—" "She didn't give us a choice, Maria," James interrupted. His voice was tight, almost dangerous. "She never gave us a choice. She made that decision for Sarah without any regard for her or us. And now our daughter is suffering because of it." Maria took a deep breath, her emotions a whirl of confusion, fear, and anger. She looked at Sarah, who was still lying motionless on the couch. She gently stroked Sarah's cheek, trying to comfort her in the way only a mother could. "Sweetheart, we're going to make sure you're okay. We're going to take care of you." For a moment, the room fell silent, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. James glanced at Maria, his eyes full of pain and rage. He wanted answers. He wanted to know why Karen had done this. He wanted to know what she had been thinking when she crossed that line. What made her think she had the right to put Sarah through this? The silence was broken by the sharpening of the phone, and James snapped to attention. It was the doctor's office. He answered the call immediately, his voice tense with urgency. "Hello? Is this Dr. Phillips?" "Yes, Mr. Harris. We've received your message. I understand there's been an incident with your daughter. Is she in immediate distress?" Dr. Phillips's voice came through, calm and professional, though James could hear the underlying concern. "Yes," James replied, his voice trembling. "She's in pain. We need help. What should we do?" "Don't worry, Mr. Harris. We'll see her right away. I'm sending someone over to your house. In the meantime, try to keep Sarah calm. Don't let her move too much. We'll have a professional look at her as soon as possible." "Thank you. Please hurry," James said, relief flooding his chest. He hung up the phone and turned to Maria. "They're sending someone over. We'll know more soon." Maria nodded, still holding Sarah close. "What do we do in the meantime?" James's jaw clenched. He felt helpless. "We wait, and we try to keep Sarah as comfortable as we can." As the minutes ticked by, the quiet was suffocating. James couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. What kind of person would do something like this? How had Karen become so consumed with her own ideas of what was right that she had forgotten about the human being in front of her, the little girl she was hurting? It was becoming clear to James that Karen had been playing a dangerous game. She had been so focused on her own beliefs that she had failed to see Sarah for who she truly was, a child who didn't need to be fixed. Sarah needed love, support, and understanding, not someone's misguided attempt at making her better. And now, thanks to Karen, Sarah was in pain. There would be consequences, James swore to himself. There would be consequences for anyone who dared to harm his family. The doorbell rang suddenly, pulling James from his thoughts. He rushed to answer it, and standing in the doorway was a nurse carrying a medical kit. Behind her was Dr. Phillips, a tall man with a calm demeanor. "We'll take it from here," Dr. Phillips said, his voice reassuring. "Let's get Sarah the help she needs." The air in the house felt thick with tension as Dr. Phillips and his nurse entered, their presence a small source of comfort in the chaos of emotions that had engulfed the family. James stepped aside to let them in, his mind still reeling from the events of the afternoon. His eyes were dark with anger, but also tinged with the fear that had taken hold of him since Karen had walked into their home with her so-called solution. Dr. Phillips gave a reassuring nod to Sarah, his calm voice breaking the thick silence in the room. "Hi, Sarah, I know you've been through a lot today, but I'm going to help you feel better. Can you tell me where it hurts?" Sarah signed a few words, her fingers trembling slightly as she pointed to her ear, still holding it as if trying to block out the pain. She hadn't said much since James had come to her rescue, and the weight of what had happened seemed to hang over her like a dark cloud. Her father had seen the fear in her eyes when she signed that it hurt, but he hadn't been able to do anything to fix it, not until now. Dr. Phillips knelt beside her, gently examining the ear that Karen had poured the liquid into. As he worked, he glanced up at James, his brow furrowed in concern. "What exactly happened here? Can you tell me more about what Karen used?" James's jaw tightened. The memory of Karen standing over Sarah, her smile cold and calculating, flooded back to him. He had never imagined something like this would happen, especially not from someone they had considered a neighbor and an ally. "She came over today," James said, his voice low and tight. "She claimed she had a solution to help Sarah with her hearing. But the moment I walked in, I saw her pouring something into Sarah's ears. It wasn't just a drop or two, either. She forced it. My daughter was in pain the second it touched her skin." Dr. Phillips listened carefully, nodding as he continued to examine Sarah. His nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, sat beside Sarah, offering her comfort as the doctor worked. "It's good that you called us immediately," Dr. Phillips said after a moment, his expression serious. "From what I can see, it looks like Karen used a substance that could be very damaging to Sarah's hearing. It's hard to say for sure without doing further tests, but I'm afraid this could cause permanent harm." James's heart sank. "What? Are you saying she might lose her hearing completely? Is that what Karen did?" Dr. Phillips shook his head slowly. "It's too early to make a definitive diagnosis, but we need to act quickly. The substance Karen used could have caused damage to the eardrum, or it could have been toxic to the delicate structures in her inner ear. I'll need to run a few tests to assess the extent of the damage." James felt his blood run cold. The fear for his daughter, the helplessness he had felt earlier, was now a crushing weight pressing down on him. How had this happened? How could someone they trusted, someone who had been so helpful, turn out to be the one who endangered his little girl's future? Maria, who had been sitting in silence beside Sarah, looked up at Dr. Phillips, her face pale, but determined. "How do we fix it? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again?" Dr. Phillips paused before answering, his voice soft but firm. "We can start by getting Sarah the right treatment right away. We'll need to run a full assessment and get her the care she needs to minimize the damage. In some cases, hearing loss caused by substances like this can be temporary, but there's also the possibility it could be permanent. We'll have to monitor her very closely over the next few days." James swallowed hard. "And Karen? What happens with her? What do we do about her?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. No matter how much he wanted to forget about Karen, no matter how badly he wished that this was all just a terrible mistake, the truth was that his daughter was hurt, and it was because of Karen. He had to hold her accountable. He had to make sure that what she had done was addressed, that it wasn't swept under the rug. Maria's voice broke through his thoughts. "James, we can't let this go. Karen did this. She made the decision to harm our daughter, and now she's going to have to answer for it." James nodded, his eyes narrowing with a cold determination. I'm calling the police. This isn't just a matter of negligence. This is abuse. She's gone too far." Before Maria could respond, Sarah suddenly stirred on the couch, her hand reaching out weakly as she signed to her father. James leaned down, his voice soft. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you okay?" Sarah's eyes were still filled with confusion and fear, but there was something else there too. A plea, a desperate need for reassurance. She signed slowly, her hands trembling as she formed the words. Why? Why did she do this? The question hit James like a punch to the gut. Why? Why had Karen done this to their daughter? Why had she crossed that line? He had no answers. He didn't even know if he could find the words to explain it to Sarah. How could he tell his little girl that someone who had once been a friend had intentionally hurt her? Dr. Phillips finished his examination, standing up and giving James a long, meaningful look. "I'll send you to a specialist to assess the full extent of the damage. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay calm, keep Sarah comfortable, and get her the rest she needs. I'm also going to send some pain medication to help manage her discomfort." James nodded, his mind still swirling with thoughts of what had happened. He was angry, but he was also filled with a sense of urgency. He had to protect his daughter, and he had to make sure Karen was held accountable for her actions. After Dr. Phillips and the nurse left, James made the call to the police. He couldn't just let this go. As much as he wanted to put the whole thing behind him, he knew that if he didn't take action, Sarah would never feel safe again. The woman who had claimed to be helpful had become the source of their pain. And now, she needed to be held responsible for it. As James dialed the police, Maria sat beside him, her face full of concern but also resolve. "We'll get through this, James. We'll get through this together. Sarah needs us." James looked at his daughter, who was now resting peacefully on the couch, her face still pale, but her breathing more even. "I know," he whispered, brushing a lock of hair from Sarah's forehead. "We'll make sure she's okay. We'll make sure Karen pays for what she did." The phone call went through, and as James began to explain what had happened, he couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that his world had shifted irreparably. This wasn't just about a neighbor's misguided attempt to help. This was about a violation of trust, a violation of the innocence of his daughter. And he would make sure that Karen would never be able to hurt anyone again. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the fear of someone you trusted crossing a line, we want to hear from you. What would you do if someone you considered a friend hurt your loved ones? Share your thoughts, experiences, or advice in the comments below. Your voice could help someone else who's going through something similar. And remember, if you found this story compelling, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. We'll continue bringing you powerful tales that challenge our perceptions and remind us of the importance of trust, justice, and standing up for what's right. Stay safe, protect your loved ones, and don't let anyone take advantage of your trust. Let's keep this conversation going. Your experience matters.